Persona 5 is a good game. I liked it, anyways. The gameplay is kept fresh by an extreme stylization and dynamic environment, as well as the opportunity to experiment and adapt inherent in the combat system. I connected with more of the main cast than I have in the game for a long time. Yusuke's struggle to emerge from his artistic slump was great, and Haru's genuine innocence and compassion as she deals with the all-too-real problem of who she can trust made for a neat little story. Even Ryuji's bumbling efforts to improve himself and reconnect with the track team had their moments. Nearly all of these characters are immediately engaging and resonant. The confidants are also pretty good, but for the sake of time I won't get into them here. Most of the antagonists reminded me of villains from a Saturday morning cartoon, but in this case that's a good thing, because they were supremely entertaining in one way or another. I generally tend to enjoy the anime aesthetic as well, so that was a nice bonus. The game isn't without its flaws, of course, especially later on, but overall I found it to be an enjoyable experience. Easily an 8 out of 10. Recommended. After my playthrough, I heard they were making an anime adaptation of the game, and I was intrigued. After all, the game had plenty of anime cutscenes beforehand. I was interested in what a full-length version of that would be like, and I felt like a lot of the flaws in the game could be easily ironed out in the transition. It seemed like a great opportunity. So, I pulled up a reputable anime site, Crunchyroll probably, and typed in Persona 5, the animation. Sure enough, I found what I was looking for. I clicked play. So, I got 4.5 episodes in, and then a strange thing happened. I felt a burning sensation build upwards in my stomach, like a heated knife starting to poke through the ribcage. At first I thought it was indigestion, but then I heard a voice in my head, speaking a language that I didn't know, but somehow understood. The voice spoke in a slow, even tempo. It was giving a command. The knife twisted. And it was at that point that I lost consciousness for a while. Darkness, warm and welcome. To be stripped of responsibility, of fear. I was troubled by my affinity for it. And then I remembered. The nightmare. When I woke up, I was in the local McDonald's, lying in a pool of blood and entrails. The lights overhead burned my eyes, and as I slowly lifted myself from the pile of slop, I noticed a girl just a few feet away, dead and missing both arms and a leg. She was staring at me with this frozen expression of terror, as though she had seen the end of the world unfolding before her. It was then that I noticed the sound of police sirens in the distance. Boy, was that hard to explain, but not as hard as this series. How should I explain this series? I suppose I should start with myself. Hi, I'm Mivnal. I don't like very much. I don't like people. I don't like math. And I especially don't like this anime series. Because this anime series is bad. And that's not an opinion, it's a fact. Its story is awful. Its animation is dull. Its use of the soundtrack is disgusting. Its characters are lifeless husks, and the world is also a lifeless husk. All of this, I'm sure, has been said before, but I'm going to talk about it anyways, because this series already took my time, and if it won't pay me back in enjoyment, well, I'm not walking away from that exchange empty-handed, at least not gracefully. So, first comments. Everything is incredibly ugly. In the game, there were these neat, fully animated cutscenes that added to the game's atmosphere and almost made it feel like you were in a movie. Was I expecting the anime adaptation to look similar to this? Yes. But this falls vastly short of even more realistic expectations. It's like, at one point, when I was young and tried to draw some of the characters in Naruto from specific points in the manga, I tried my best, but my dumb hands couldn't capture the fluid movement or quirks of artistry implicit in the original work. You could tell what I was trying to recreate, but it looked off and unprofessional, like the subject was caught in a funhouse mirror. That's sort of how I feel about the art in Persona 5, the animation. The characters look so drab and uninspired. It sucks. And this visual horror is at its most apparent during 3 specific parts of the narrative. The first is in the all-out attacks. In the game, these were stylish ways to finish off the enemy. Cartoonish and perhaps a bit dumb, but also fun and exciting. The screen turns red and breaks like glass, shards reflecting the faces of the protagonists as they turn into white ghosts that club the opposition to death. The extreme contrast between light and dark, enemies thrashing about in a red backdrop, the hyper-stylized freeze frames. This is what makes the all-out attacks special. Here, though, it's something else. This is the worst thing in the history of mankind. You thought the Titanic sinking was bad? Look at this. Abandon hope. What happens to the background? Why do all the enemies just stay stiff as a load of cardboard as they're being pummeled? Why does the protagonist look so incredibly lame during the freeze frame? These are questions I'll be asking myself until the day I die. It doesn't help that the battle before that was also awful. But if I stop to recount everything that's wrong in this show, we'll probably be here for literal weeks. So where do we go from there? What compares to the horror of a Persona 5 animation all-out attack? Simple. The show's attempt at fan service. Now, in the episodes I watched, there was only one real instance of this, but it was meaningful enough to definitively put this show on my shit list. Here, a fake Anta Kamiki flaunts herself in front of the villain, and 2 of the 3 current leads react with apish arousal, clearly marking it as a moment that's supposed to be titillating. Now, I personally don't care much for fan service in anime. I don't mind it either, of course, that's the nature of the medium, but when it does come up, I think we can all agree it's important to indeed make the sexy moments sexy. Otherwise, it just looks like a bunch of dead fish on display. And that's exactly where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. The generic, uninspired art form mixes with the overall atmosphere of the moments to produce a one-of-a-kind, dismal fail. Just look at her. Look at that washed-out color scheme, at that absolutely and thoroughly unexciting form. What is that awful meme the kids use nowadays? Thick? More like stick. More like poorly drawn stick. More like whoever drew this isn't qualified to be human. Is Cloverworks Studio actually manned by a squadron of sentient fridge magnets? The world may never know. Animation is hard. Yes, I know. That doesn't exactly benefit my experience, however. Now, you might say that this being so non-arousing is intentional, that this on is simply a representation of Kamoshida's demented desire, and that this display is some sort of meta-commentary on the nature of sexual objectification. To that I say, you're giving them too much credit. Now, to check this, I actually went ahead and looked at the beach episode, which I'm pretty sure is contractually obligated to try and harden virginal PPs. And guess what? They're shit too. So no, this isn't a clever spin on the ethics of out-of-character doujins. It's just not good. And by that I mean grade F, -5. If you've never heard of that rating before, good. Pray you never hear it again. What could possibly be next after that? What could even conceivably compare to the horror of a Persona 5 animation fan service scene? The answer? Kamoshida's boss battle. Now, have you ever seen a 2-dimensional object interact with a 3-dimensional object? No, and that's the way it should be. But it seems no one told the fine people at Cloverworks Studio that, because they thought it would be acceptable to just throw a rejected PlayStation 2 sprite into the mix. Spoilers, it isn't. Fake On plays more of a role in the battle, so that's bad. They try to make her look curvier by giving her a good old case of lordosis posture, but I see through the lies of the Jedi. The secret weapon in this fight, after the protagonist dies, by the way, is the arrival of a savior, of the greatest champion, the only one that could hold a candle to the monster that is Kamoshida. I am, of course, referring to Agathion, the coolest character in the entire game. Now, you might say he's a clear visual downgrade from Arsene. You might say that we've already fucking seen him before as a minion, and that kind of diminishes the intimidation factor. You would be fucking insane for making those observations. Didn't you see his eye overlay with the protagonist? Didn't you hear the music swell when he appeared on stage? The music is telling you to get excited. Didn't you see? His burst of dark magic was slightly larger this time, even though earlier we saw our son casually brush off his assault and were really given no reason to believe that this one should be any more powerful. Isn't it thrilling? This is all sarcasm, the fight is comically awful. And that's it, the unholy triune of this game's visual performance. But I want to make something clear. For the most part, visuals are of secondary importance to me. I can forgive the native ugliness of this show. I can even forgive garbage like this. These 3 cases are just what I found to be inexcusably repugnant. Personally, I tend to be more interested in story and character development. That was why I looked into this to begin with. I was hoping for an expansion of some of the more underdeveloped parts of the narrative. After all, it's not as though there wouldn't be an opportunity for it. I was also curious about what kind of experience it would be seeing this anime-centric game made into an anime itself. What would change in the transition? After all, if it's just a one-to-one conversion, and there's nothing new, what's even the point? I wanted to see what the game couldn't show us. I wanted to see a bit of the protagonist's psyche where he was just a blank slate beforehand. I wanted to see some more of the nitty-gritty of his early struggles in the city. I wanted to see some of the action imagined in the turn-based combat. Amazingly, however, it seems that every single change made in Persona 5, the animation, is for the worse. Take, for example, one of the earlier scenes in the game, where you're being inducted into Shujin Academy. It's a scene featuring the principal and Kawakami, where you're warned to be on your best behavior. But that's not all it is. There are a lot of little details that help this scene along. The tone of both of these characters tells us a lot about their particular demeanor, and how they're likely going to fit into the narrative going forward. You can sense the raw contempt Kobayakawa has for the protagonist, well beyond what the circumstance demands. And Kawakami just sounds dead inside. Both of these people very clearly do not want you there, and the bright lighting only further suggests that this is standard fare for the school. It's a beautiful day, all is well in Shujin Academy, and your future is already looking dim. It's not high art, and it's definitely not subtle, but it knows what it's after, and it does it competently. All of these smaller details are lost in the shuffle with the anime. The principal and Kawakami speak in a much more neutral tone, making it seem as though this really is all just boilerplate stuff. The characterization is lost, and though it might be a bit difficult to further quantify this, if you put the 2 scenes side by side, the difference is plain as day, almost literally in this case. Instead, make way for Kawakami dropping her quasi-sexualized maid pamphlet right at the protagonist's feet. Oops, I wonder if this is going to come up again. She picks it up, and then gives it to him afterwards? What the fuck? To put it plainly, I was unimpressed with this scene, and it only gets worse from there. Remember Takemi's confidant? In the game, you go up to her in the clinic, ask her for non-specific magic medicine, and then she tries to scare you off by testing some other drug. She takes particular care to keep this private. And this is fair, considering that even in the game itself, they call it pretty sketchy. It's a big deal, and she wants to keep it under wraps, for her own sake. In Persona 5 the animation, however, she just walks up to the protagonist in the cafe, with Sojiro less than 10 feet away, and gives him a bag of cocaine unsolicited. Come back to my place if you want more. I practically flipped the table when I saw that happen. Thank you, Cloverworks Studio. Thank you for making me question why I get out of bed in the morning. When they go back to Kamoshida's castle for the final battle, there are these spotlights shooting up into the sky. I guess they're expecting an invasion by helicopter. The actual traversing through Kamoshida's castle leading up to said battle is literally non-existent, which was really upsetting because I wanted to see the torn King of Desire trying to vor on. Can't we have some version of that? No, says Cloverworks Studio. That would be too entertaining. The persuasion element is even more laughably stupid than it is in-game. I hate you, Baka. No, you don't. Now we are friends. I am not even exaggerating. If you check the scene, that's almost exactly what happens. It's a benighted display. The transition from the real world to the palace is exactly what it is in the game. But in the game, it works because of the active connection you have with the protagonist and what's going on. The effect is another way to bring you in as a player. It looks as though you're the one going into the metaverse, ready to mete out justice and save the world. Again, it's cheesy, but effective, because of the circumstance. Here, there is no such connection, and so, here, it just looks terrible, as though they put it in without any thought or appreciation for its use in the original product. What works in a video game might not work the same way in an anime series. Could they really not have come up with anything more imaginative or inspired? This would have been a prime moment to take advantage and show us a bit more about what the transition is actually like. But apparently that's too much for them. Speaking of using things from the game without understanding them, the use of the soundtrack is just not good. In the game, the soundtrack was good. It had this jazzy undertone to it, and the vocals were excellent, at least for the most part. But again, it was designed for a game. There's often no definitive beginning or ends to the main songs, and again, that's appropriate. It's not like the game knows how long you're going to spend in Kamoshida's castle, or how long you're going to be looking for the Ginza line in Shibuya. But because of that, when it's just chucked into the anime for the relevant location, it can be jarring, and negatively affect how well the scenes flow together, which is already pretty piss poor to begin with. It's just another quality of life element that Persona 5, the animation, fucks up. The opening theme made specifically for the anime is fine. We see that Sai has the incredible ability to shift her eyes across her face like an alien. That qualifies her to be a phantom thief, I think. The characters are dull shadows of themselves, darting across the stage by checkbook and whip. Their charm has been sucked out, and it's so terrible I'm compelled to stop speaking about them. But what about the protagonist? In the game, he was a blank slate, for the player to project whatever bullshit they liked onto. But there were hints to a potential personality beneath it all, like when he sadistically smiles upon getting his power and having the ability to commit massive amounts of violence on his enemies, all the while leading a revolution against the corrupt order of the world. This isn't something that a mindless nobody just does. Surely there's something they could pull from this. And they had to, because this isn't a game anymore, and the protagonist we played as is not the one on screen. We're not fighting Ren's battles, we're directly sharing in his success. His life isn't ours anymore. That connection is gone. And as a result, the onus is on them to make us care about this guy on his own, and his adventure throughout the world of Persona 5. And they fail. Ren Amamiya is the most hollow, disinteresting character I've encountered in a long time. We're given no insight into his emotional register, or his past beyond the courtroom, or his personal thoughts on the ethics of enforced brainwashing. It seems as though there are no thoughts to begin with, just a jump from scripted action to scripted action. Hence my theory. I theorize that what we're seeing is not the true character of the Persona 5 protagonist, but instead a pure copy of his game self being controlled by another player. We're seeing another player play the game. A player whose animating thoughts and experiences can't be observed, hence only the hollow exterior is present. And from this perspective, we can see just how strange and unnatural it is. A tear in reason itself, which the universe is directed to ignore. That's one explanation for Ren's lack of character. Another is that Cloverworks Studio just sucks. Think about it. This, I think, is the worst part of Persona 5, the animation. The other things I mentioned were terrible, but sometimes pretty funny. In hindsight, of course, I was pretty horrified while watching it. But this is just an element that's completely without value. It's boring. And when the main character in your anime series is boring, amidst a sea of unimpressive visuals, awful changes to the source material, misapplications of what worked in the game, characters who've dropped 50 IQ points in the transition, a complete failure to positively innovate on the story or its experience, and a load of other things, that is the kiss of death. It honestly feels like the makers of this show had a discussion at some point that was like, okay, this is a popular brand name, which people are going to watch no matter what. You know what that means? No standards. Break out the crystal meth. And then they shit this out over the course of a week. Now, maybe some people are saying that the series gets better as it goes on, that I just stopped too early. But in my view, that's like saying, no, don't stop eating this giant mound of dog shit. There's a little bit of chocolate further in. Keep eating. Like, no, screw you. You eat the mound of dog shit. I'm getting some real food. And really, that's all that should be said about this series. As far as concluding thoughts go, maybe check it out if you don't have a PlayStation, or access to the internet, or two brain cells to rub together. Otherwise, there are better avenues to take, like forgetting that this exists. I wish I could do that, but alas, I cannot. Cursed to a life of knowing about Persona 5, the animation. My life. Oh, my life. You might think I'm being unfair or mean to the poor fridge magnets at Cloverworks Studio, but, I really liked Persona 5, and seeing it like this really grinds my gears into dust. Oh well. Farewell for now.